is, how would they do this? And again, we don't know, but I'm speculating how they would do this. Okay, so if you look at mythology, Egyptian mythology is different from all other world mythologies. There's Greek mythology, there's Chinese mythology, there's Babylonian mythology, but Egyptian mythology, it's unique. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you the basic contours of the mythology. Very simple. So there are three main characters in the mythology. There's Ra, the sun god. There's Osiris. And there's Horus. Okay, these are the three main gods that Egyptians worship. Ra is what gave life to the universe. He's a sun god. Osiris is the god of civilization. He built Egypt. Okay? And then Horus is the god of kingship of empire. He's the one who brings stability to the throne. Okay, so there are different stories associated with Ra, Osiris, and Horus. Ra, what he does is every night he goes into the underworld and he fights the serpent, Opithus. Every night, Opithus, the serpent, he's trying to swallow the sun to prevent the sun from rising. So Ra must kill him every night. Okay? And there are different ways that he kills Opithus. Sometimes he stabs Opithus with a knife. Sometimes he uses a lance. Sometimes he burns Opithus. Okay? Sometimes he strangles Opithus. But there are different ways that he kills Opithus. But rest assured, he kills Opithus every single night so that the sun can rise in the morning. If one day Ra doesn't defeat Opithus, well, you have a solar eclipse. Okay? The sun cannot rise. But rest assured, Ra will defeat him eventually. Okay? Eventually, Ra gives birth to Osiris. And Osiris is a great pharaoh. But his brother, Seth, it's pronounced Seth, okay, but it's spelled Seth. He is jealous. He wants the throne. So he tricks Osiris. One day he says to Osiris, look, I built a tomb. And this tomb is really comfortable. And so Osiris, oh, let me try. So Osiris jumps in the tomb, and he's like, whoa, it's really comfortable. And of course, Seth then closes the tomb, and then throws the tomb away. Now, good news is that Osiris has a smart wife. He's pretty dumb, but Isis is pretty smart. So Isis is now looking for Osiris. And Seth's like, oh, I can't allow Isis to find Osiris. So Seth cuts Osiris into 1 million pieces, okay? So tomb, and then he cuts up Osiris and throws Osiris all around the world. But Isis is committed. So Isis goes around the world and finds all the pieces and reassembles him, okay? But she knows that eventually Seth will find them again. So she has sex with him really quickly, which gives birth to Horus. And Horus wants the throne back. So he goes to war with Seth. And they have a series of challenges, okay? And some of these challenges include drowning. So what they do is they turn each other into hippos. They go into the bottom of the river, and they see who can hold the breath the longest. They drown each other, okay, basically. But also, there's a challenge where Seth, can you see this word? Okay, R-A-P-E, okay? He will do this to Horus because it's a sign of domination. But eventually, Horus wins out, and he becomes the pharaoh. Okay? So this is the main structure of Egyptian mythology. And as you can see, it's really weird. Okay? And it doesn't really make sense as a story. It's not a great story. But if you don't see it as a story, but as a script, it makes a lot more sense, right? It's not something to be believed. It's something to be acted out. Okay? Why? Because in Egyptian religion, the pharaoh is a literal reincarnation of Ra, Osiris, and Horus. And when you act these things out, you become the gods because you have their memories. Okay? So, how? Let me explain this, okay? I know you're a bit confused by this, but let me explain. So let's go back to Kant. What Kant tells us is that there's something called the noumena, which are the things in themselves. We can never know the things in themselves. We can never know true reality. We can only know the phenomena, which is the things we see. In other words, we cannot differentiate between what is true and what is false. So if you're able to control our experience, you're able to control our memories. Okay? So let me give you another example of this. Remember Monkey Island? On Monkey Island, we discussed this previously. 100 people are transported onto an island randomly, and they have to survive millions of flesh-eating monkeys. And this experience makes them strong, wise, and united. They're transported back to the real world, and together, they conquer the world together. But now the challenge is, how do I ensure that my children and my grandchildren inherit my legacy? And the answer is through ritual. Okay? So what you do is you take your children, you put them on an island, and you tell them a story, and then you give them psychedelics. Psychedelics are drugs that enhance your experience. So you actually believe the story is happening to you, okay? It's like being put into a movie, okay? And then you have these rituals that make you believe that you actually experienced this yourself, okay? So this is what we call programming. And this is the great secret of the human brain. Every human brain can be programmed in a certain way. Okay? So let's go back to the story. What's going on here? This is a recipe for programming the Pharaoh into separate identities. All three of these individuals, Ra, Osiris, Horus, represent different identities. Ra represents the virtuous hero, right? Osiris represents the passive victim. And Horus represents the vengeful child. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So, by doing these different rituals, I can get the Pharaoh to believe he's a different person in different circumstance. So, while the Pharaoh is drugged up, the Pharaoh is dressed up as Ra, and he will take an effigy or a real person, and he will stab, lance, burn, or strangle that person to feel as though you're a virtuous hero. And also what will happen is that the Pharaoh will then be asked to be Osiris. And guess what? The person will be put in a tomb, cut up, and have sex with a prostitute, okay? Pretending to be a priest. And then Horus will be, of course, this, okay? So this is all to create trauma, which creates disassociation, which allows the priest to program the Pharaoh. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So how this works is, while this is happening, there's the Pharaoh is under a lot of trauma, but there's always someone there to support the Pharaoh, and that's Isis, right? So there's a priest in the Isis mask using the Isis voice to calm the Pharaoh, even have sex with the Pharaoh to make the Pharaoh dependent on Isis. And now Isis becomes the controller, the person that the Pharaoh will always trust. So if the priest ever want to tell Pharaoh to do something, then late at night, while the Pharaoh is sleeping or on drugs, Isis, wearing the mask, can come in and whisper to Pharaoh what to do. Okay? And in this system, there are different ways in which the priest can use to activate the different identities. But the main mechanism is smell. Okay? Smell. And what this means is that while all this is happening, there are different scents. for different identities. Okay, so for example, with Ra, it might be incense. Okay, but with Osiris, it might be, I don't know, roses, who knows, okay? But, so what happens is when the pharaoh is the throne room, and the priest need the pharaoh to make a certain decision, the priest will let out different scents, which will activate different emotions in the pharaoh, which then determines how the pharaoh will make the decision. Okay, so there's different control mechanisms. Okay, and what's important for us to understand is we're all like this, right? Because, for example, we have different identities. At school, we're a student, but at home, we're a child. When we're outside, we're friends, we're a friend. When we're at work, we're an employee. So we behave differently depending on the different circumstance. And the circumstance activates a certain emotion, certain identity, certain behavior, certain actions in us. Okay? So we're all programmable, but the pharaoh has to be programmed to a certain degree. Okay? So to better understand this, let me give you an example. Let's just say that you are the best football player, the best soccer player in the whole world. No one can beat you. You're basically Messi, okay? But one day, for example, for whatever reason, you wake up and you lose all your memory. You forget what your name is. You forget who your friends are. You even forget that you play soccer. And what's also really strange is the entire world forgets that you play soccer. Okay? So you're just wandering around and you have no idea who you are. And you do this for like 10 years. Suddenly one day, for whatever reason, you're on a soccer field and someone kicks you a ball and you kick it back. Would you still be the best soccer player in the world? The answer is yes, you would be, right? Why? Because you've been trained. It's muscle memory. It's your subconscious. So that's the trick here. The trick is to train you in a certain way to make you a robot. Okay? Is it possible for me to make someone into a killer? Yes, because what I do is I make that person take a lot of psychedelics and then train that person to shoot someone with a gun, okay? And then while he's shooting that person, I use the word abracadabra. So what happens is the person, if he's walking, has a gun, all they do is use the word abracadabra, takes the gun and shoots someone, okay? All right? So through programming, I can turn anyone into a robot. I can turn anyone into a sex robot, a killer robot, even a sex killer robot. Okay? I can do all this. And that's this great secret here. All right? So 5,000 years ago in Egypt, they were doing this. But again, okay, what's really important is, this is all speculation. And it's really important for you to doubt and question me. Because we don't actually know that this happened. All the records have been lost to us. And obviously, this would be the greatest state secret of Egypt. But from my perspective, it makes sense. Because the pharaoh needs to be like this in order to survive, right? Because the pharaoh has brothers who want his throne. If he's a nice guy, guess what? Dead, right? So that's true for everyone in power. If you're a nice person who feels sorry for poor people, you're dead, okay? So you have to have certain characteristics in order to be a great leader. And the main characteristic is dissociation. So the priests are actually protecting the pharaoh, okay? Does that make sense? All right. So I know this is hard, but I need you guys to remember the story of Egyptian mythology because we'll use it over and over. Also, these techniques that they use, tombs, cutting you up, sex, drowning, rape, are also techniques that we still use today. So what they did in Egypt 5,000 years ago, we still do today. There's absolutely no difference. And I will show you this as we move on. Okay? But are there any questions so far? Yeah? Sorry. Can you speak in the microphone, please?
So they only trained the pharaoh by this method and not his relatives, his brothers or something.
Okay, that's a great question. So who's being trained into this system? And the answer is everyone, right? Because the people really in control are the priests. They're what we today call the deep state. And it's possible the Pharaoh gets in an accident and dies. Okay, so you need someone right away to replace the Pharaoh. So everyone in the royal family is being trained into this. The problem arises when the priest class divides into different political factions who all want power. Then they program the Pharaoh's brother to create a civil war. Okay? So everyone who is in the royal family is being programmed like this. But then this raises a really interesting question, is like, why would they agree to this? Right? Now, what's interesting is that these psychedelics and these trauma create something called NDE, okay? What we call near-death experiences. So for like a minute or 10 minutes or half an hour, they are literally dead. And what we know is when that happens, and it's really interesting, is when you feel you're almost dead, you transcend into the spirit world. In the spirit world, you actually meet God. And we know this because tens of thousands of people have had an NDE, near-death experience. You know, they got in a car crash and they blacked out, or they were drowning and they almost died, or they had a heart attack and died. They all went to meet God. And they all said, up there in the spirit world, it's all peaceful, it's all love. You can feel God in you. But God told me I cannot die. I have to come back and tell people the true spirit world. So the royal family does this because it gives them wisdom and access to the spirit world so that they feel as though they're truly God. Okay? And that's why they agree to do this. All right? But then the question then is, how do the priests know how to do this? Because they experiment on themselves. Because they're priests and they want to access the spirit world themselves, and they recognize that near-death experiences and psychedelics are the best two ways to go into that world. So they drown themselves, they cut themselves up, they starve themselves. There are lots of ways to create near-death experiences, okay? But that's how they know the secrets. And what's amazing is we have not improved on the Egyptians today. Like all the modern technology, all the modern medicine, science, we're just doing what they're doing, okay? Okay, so does it make sense, guys? Okay, any more questions before I move on?
So
okay.
There's no difference between heaven and hell.
Sorry, excuse me?
There's no difference between heaven and hell because, I mean, technically speaking, if you do bad things, you will never go to heaven. But and then if you experience NDE and you still meet the spiritual world, then you'll realize that there's no difference between heaven and hell.
Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so what is heaven? What is hell? Why should you do bad things? Why should you do good things? There's no difference. Okay, so what people who suffer NDE will tell you is this: when you go up to the spirit world, the first thing that will happen is something called a life review. What is a life review? A life review is just you're able to see exactly what you did your entire life. So if you're a bad person, that's hell. Because you're able to now feel pain for the first time, right? Dissociation means you don't feel any pain, but guess what? You're just tricking yourself because when you're up in the spirit world, you have to see exactly what you did to other people, and you have to feel their pain. Okay, that's what hell is. And heaven is, you can see the good that you did, okay? So what they say is that when you do evil, you create negative energy. And when you do good, you create positive energy. And you can't see that in this world, but up in the spirit world, you're able to see for yourself, finally, how much evil you did and how much good you did. Okay? And that's what heaven and hell is. Okay? And, I mean, I don't want to go too much into this, but another theory is that when you die, the only thing that remains in you is love. Okay? So love is actually a physical force. And the more love you have, the higher you can ascend in the spirit world. And the less love you have, well, you're kind of stuck and you have to come back and do it again. Okay? So, be a nice person. All right? Okay, great question. Okay, so are we clear about this? Okay, well, we'll discuss more about near-death experiences later on, in the spirit world later on. Okay, but I want you to understand that 5,000 years ago in Egypt, they discovered how to program the pharaoh into a robot that they can control. And we still use the same techniques today. Okay? Any questions before I move on?